I wake up at first light, as I've done for the last 49 years. Old habits die hard, especially when you're 69, and for most of your life, you've been getting up at 5:30 to get to work at the municipality by 7. It's been 2 years since I retired, and I still wake up before the alarm clock rings. I stretch, feeling a familiar ache in my lower back. The bed beneath me creaks, the same double bed Martha and I bought after we were married. The right side of the bed remains untouched, as it has for the past 3 years since Martha's passing. The wooden floorboards creak familiarly under my feet as I walk to the kitchen. Every creak, every crack in the ceiling, every scraped tile on the bathroom floor is familiar to me. I was born in this house on Maple Street 69 years ago, grew up here, brought my fiancée here. When my parents died, Martha and I bought out my sister's shares and stayed in the family nest. The windows face east, and the sunrise always floods the kitchen with warm light. I turn on the old coffee maker, a gift from Martha for our 30th anniversary. I crack 2 eggs into a frying pan. Eating breakfast alone has become my new normal. Sometimes I talk to Martha as if she's still sitting across the table with a cup of tea, as she has done every morning for 45 years. It's a good day to work in the garden, I say into the emptiness of the kitchen. The tulips are starting to bloom. Martha loved tulips. After she died, I planted more, and now the whole front garden is a blaze of red, yellow, and pink. The garden behind the house is my pride. Neat vegetable beds, a few fruit trees that I planted in the 80s, a pergola covered with wild grapes. Everything here bears the imprint of my caring hands. It was in this garden that Elliot, our only son, learned to walk. This is where we had family barbecues every summer. The house is not luxurious, an ordinary 2-story Victorian-style house, a little dilapidated on the outside, but sturdy and cozy on the inside. Some boards on the veranda need replacing, and the roof should be re-roofed, but I'm putting off the repairs. A municipal employee's pension is modest, and spending on Martha's medical care in the last years of her life has depleted our savings. After breakfast, I go out into the garden. It is a warm May morning, and the dew has already evaporated from the grass. I was leaning over a bed of carrots, pulling weeds, when I heard the familiar voice of a neighbor. "Good morning, Vern." Early bird, as usual. Lester Price, my 75-year-old neighbor, is leaning over the low fence that separates our plots. Lester and I have been friends for over 30 years, ever since the Price family moved into the house across the street. "Hello, Les." "Yeah, I thought I'd do some gardening while it's still hot. I hear your boy's back in town?" Lester adjusts his old baseball cap, sliding it to the back of his head. I straighten up, resting my hands on my lower back. "Elliot? Yeah, he called yesterday, said he'd be here today. Like he's bringing his new wife to meet me." "New wife? What happened to the redhead?" "Kimberly? Divorced a year ago. This new one is Nancy. I haven't seen her yet. He hasn't been to see you in a while. Since Martha's funeral, if I'm not mistaken." I nod, feeling a familiar stab of pain. Elliot really doesn't come to his parents' house much. After his mother died, he came to the funeral, stayed 3 days, and disappeared for 3 years. He calls occasionally, usually on holidays, asking briefly about my health. Life is different for everyone, Les. He's 46. He's got his own worries. Still, it's strange that he suddenly decided to come here, and with a new wife. Lester squinted. "Be careful, Vern. I don't want to offend you, but your boy's always had a mind of his own." I shrug. The relationship with my son has never been easy. Elliot always wanted more. More money, more recognition, more fame. He left Fall River when he was 18, going to college in Boston, and has only been back for special occasions since. Toward evening, a silver BMW stops in my driveway. I fiddle with a rose bush by the porch, straighten up, and cover my eyes with my hand against the setting sun. A tall man in an expensive-looking suit steps out of the car. My son Elliot. Despite the expensive clothes, he looks tired. The wrinkles around his eyes, which I hadn't noticed before, have deepened, and his once thick brown hair has thinned at the temples. A slender blonde girl in a tight dress and high heels, totally inappropriate for the old uneven paths of Fall River, swoops out of the passenger seat. "Dad!" Elliot smiles broadly, coming toward me. "How are you?" "You look great." I wipe my hands on my jeans and hug my son. The hug comes out awkward, like we've both forgotten how to do it. "Elliot, It's good to see you, son. This is Nancy. Elliot puts his hand on the blonde's shoulder. My wife. Nancy smiles, showing off her perfect white teeth. We meet at last, Mr. Hill. Elliot has told me so much about you. Her voice is sonorous, almost childlike, and I can't help thinking she could be my daughter. Nancy is at least 15 years younger than Elliot. Nice to meet you, Nancy, and call me Vernon, please. We walk through the house. I notice Nancy looking around at the old furniture, shabby rugs, and faded wallpaper, as if assessing how much it's all worth. I apologize for the mess, I say, though the house is clean. I wasn't expecting company. Oh, no worries, Nancy waves it off. Such a nice, authentic house. It breathes history. Elliot sets his suitcase down by the stairs. We were thinking of staying a couple days, if you don't mind. I want to show Nancy the town where I grew up. I nod, trying to hide my surprise. In the past 20 years, Elliot has never once expressed a desire to stay at his parents' house longer than necessary. Of course, your room is always ready. I mean your old room, I say, embarrassed. I haven't changed anything in there since you left. As Elliot takes things upstairs, Nancy strolls through the living room, looking at the pictures on the walls. Is that your wife? She asks, pointing to a portrait of Martha. Yes, I step closer. Martha. She left 3 years ago. Cancer. Oh, I'm so sorry. Nancy touches my hand with manicured fingers. Elliot said you loved her very much. I nod, not trusting my voice. It's strange to hear this strange woman talk about Martha, about our love. It's even stranger that Elliot would tell her about it. The son has always been reserved in his expressions of affection. At dinner, Elliot asked me about my life, my neighbors, the news of the city, an interest he hasn't shown in years. Nancy is always putting food on my plate, insisting on more, praising my humble cooking as if she were eating at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Dad, have you ever thought about moving? Elliot asks casually as we move on to dessert. This house is too big for one person, and the stairs are steep. At your age. At my age, I can handle stairs just fine. I interrupt softly. Sonner, where am I supposed to move to? This is my house. It's your mom's and mine. But it must be expensive to maintain such an old building, Nancy interjects. And all those memories. Sometimes a fresh start is just what's needed. I look at her carefully, then at my son. Something about their overprotectiveness alarms me. I'm not moving anywhere, I say firmly. This is where I was born, and this is where I'll die if I'm lucky. Elliot and Nancy look at each other. Nancy's smile disappears for a moment, but it returns. Of course, Vernon, it's your decision. She squeezes my hand again. We're just worried about you, aren't we, dear? Elliot nods. Yes, Dad. We want you to be comfortable and safe. I mumble something thankful, but a doubt rises inside me. Since when did Elliot care so much about my comfort? The next day, Elliot and Nancy announce that they're going to be in town for a week. Elliot even volunteers to help with minor repairs, touching up the peeling paint on the porch, replacing a rotten board on the porch. Nancy cooks dinner, asking me about my youth, about what the town used to look like. Their sudden attention and concern both delight and alarm me at the same time. After lunch, when Elliot and Nancy head out to see the town, I walk out into the garden and see Lester, clearly waiting for me at the fence. How was seeing your son? Lester asked without preamble. I shrug my shoulders. It was fine. Strange, but fine. They're very caring. And that doesn't alarm you? Lester lowers his voice even though there's no one around. Look, Vern, I saw them checking out the outside of the house while you were in the shower, going around, taking pictures. Your son was staring at his phone like he was calculating something. You're exaggerating, Les. Elliot may not be the best son in the world, but he's not going to. Wouldn't what? Lester squints. Lay eyes on your house? Think about it. They show up out of nowhere, pretending to care, asking about moving in. Do you know what your son's doing now? Is he still a realtor? I'm confused. I really have no idea what Elliot does. I think he's been working at a real estate agency in Boston for the last few years, but I don't know the details. Be careful, man. Lester puts a wrinkled hand on my shoulder. Don't sign any papers. And keep your eyes open. I nod, feeling the seed of doubt Lester had planted begin to sprout. Maybe my old friend is right. Maybe the sudden visit from Elliot and his new wife has ulterior motives. Or maybe I just find it hard to believe that my son has finally decided to mend his ways. But either way, Lester's warning is one I've decided to take to heart. Elliot and Nancy's visit dragged on into its fourth day. Every morning I woke up hoping that today they would announce their departure, but instead they came up with new reasons to stay. Elliot was helping with chores, although his help was more like an audit. He checked the pipes in the basement, studied the attic, inspected the foundation of the house, and Nancy followed me around as if she was afraid she'd lose sight of me. "Vernon, we want to take you out to dinner tonight," Nancy said at breakfast, as I spread butter on my toast. "To that new restaurant on Main Street. Riverview, I think." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. The Riverview had opened a couple months ago and was considered the most expensive restaurant in Fall River. "It's too much," I started. "We can have dinner here." "Not another word." Nancy raised her hand as if she were a queen stopping a petitioner. "We insist. Don't we, darling?" Elliot, who was rummaging through his cell phone, nodded absently. "Of course. You deserve a little holiday, Dad." I shrugged. It was no use arguing, and I hadn't been to a restaurant in years. After Martha's death, going out alone seemed pointless. Nancy couldn't hide her impatience. All day long she fussed about the house, glancing at her watch every now and then. Toward evening, I noticed her and Elliot whispering in a corner of the living room, and Elliot was hiding something in his jacket pocket. As I was getting dressed for dinner, I happened to overhear their conversation in the kitchen. They didn't notice that the door was ajar. "Still worthless," Nancy's voice sounded annoyed. 6 or 7 years ago, it might have been worth a decent sum. But now? "The realtor said the lot was worth more than the house," Elliot said. "It's the center of town, after all. Developers would be ripping it off for a high-rise." "What if he doesn't take it?" "He will. Where will he go?" "I have a plan B." I quietly backed away from the door. My heart was beating in my throat. Plan B? So Lester was right. They did have their eyes on my house, and by the looks of it, they'd already assessed its value. The Riverview was a pretentious restaurant with dark walls, heavy curtains, and bow-tied waiters. Nancy was clearly trying to impress me, ordered the most expensive champagne, and insisted I choose the steak. Elliot was unusually silent and kept glancing at his watch, as if he were nervous. "So," Nancy smiled across the table at me as the appetizers arrived, "have you lived in this beautiful house all your life, Vernon?" I nodded, sipping my water. "Yes, my parents bought it back in the 30s. I was born in the bedroom upstairs." "How romantic," she marveled, but there was no genuine interest in her eyes. "And it's not strange to live there after, you know, after Martha was gone?" I felt my throat constrict at the mention of my wife's name. "On the contrary," I answered quietly. "Every corner reminds me of her. It's comforting." Nancy cast a quick glance at Elliot, and he cleared his throat. "Dad, Nancy and I wanted to talk to you about something important," he began, moving his wine glass closer to me. "You see, we're having some financial difficulties." I raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. "After I was asked to leave the real estate agency, it's been hard to find a new job." Elliot looked away. "Asked to leave?" I asked him again. "You never mentioned that." "Just a misunderstanding with a client," Nancy quickly put in. "Completely unfair. But you know how it is with rich clients. They think they can have it all." Elliot gave her a grateful look. "Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I'm self-employed now. I do real estate consulting, but I barely have enough money to rent an apartment. And I have a salary as a call center operator," Nancy added with a dramatic sigh. "Can you imagine? With my education, I went to college. For a semester." I suppressed a chuckle. Judging by the way Nancy was handling a dozen pieces of cutlery, her education was hardly more than makeup lessons. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "What can I do to help?" Elliot and Nancy looked at each other again, and I realized that we'd come to the crux of the dinner. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," Elliot began. "And we've come to the conclusion," Nancy interrupted, "that the smartest thing to do would be to deed your house to Elliot." I nearly choked on my wine. "Deed the house? Why?" "For tax optimization reasons," Elliot said quickly, as if he were speaking from a memorized text. "You see, if the house stays yours until, you know, before you're gone, the heirs will have to pay a huge tax. And if you give it to them now as a gift, we'll save money. And you'll continue to live in it, of course, Nancy added with a fake smile. Nothing will change. It'll just be Elliot's house on paper. I stared at them, not believing my ears. They weren't even trying to hide their true intentions. Or did they think I was that naive? What would happen to the house afterward? I asked, trying to stay calm. When I... when I'm gone, as you put it? Elliot fidgeted in his chair. Well, Nancy and I will probably move in, or if it's profitable, sell it. The neighborhood's growing, land's getting more expensive. You'd sell a house that's been home to 4 generations of hill people? I couldn't hide my bitterness. Dad, don't be so dramatic. Elliot grimaced. It's just a house. An old house in need of repair. It's a chance for us to start over. Yeah, and get out of debt, Nancy mumbled. But I heard her. Debts? I asked her again. What debts? Elliot gave his wife an angry look. Nothing serious, just some small loans. 140,000 isn't a small loan, darling, Nancy said with a chuckle and sipped her champagne. I whistled. It was really a lot of money. How did you manage to accumulate such a debt? Nancy shrugged. Life is expensive, and Elliot had a little poker game. Had to make up for it somehow. Shut up, Elliot hissed, and for the first time I saw the mask of the caring son slip from his face. What? Nancy rolled her eyes. Your father needs to know what the money from the house will be used for. Okay, here's the deal. My son is a gambler who lost a lot of money, and now he wants to take my house to cover his debts. And his wife is a calculating person who only sees me as a solution to their financial problems. And they haven't even bothered to hide it properly. I'll think about it, I said calmly, though I was seething inside. Elliot's eyes lit up. Really? That would be great, Dad. I can have the paperwork ready tomorrow. But don't rush me. I held up my hand. This is a big decision. I need to think it over. So, Mom. Sure. Elliot visibly relaxed and ordered another bottle of wine. Take as much time as you need. A day, 2, a week, a month, whatever it takes. I smiled as I watched his face stretch. The rest of dinner passed in awkward conversation. Elliot and Nancy tried to return to the subject of the house, but I steered the conversation away. I needed time to figure out how to proceed. On the way home, Nancy kept saying what a prudent man I was and how wise I was to think about the future. When I entered the house, I went straight to my room, citing fatigue. But instead of going to bed, I quietly dialed Lester's number. Les, it's Vern. You were right about Elliot and Nancy. They want my house. I knew it, Lester whispered into the phone. What are you going to do? I sighed, looking at the picture of Martha on the nightstand. I don't know yet, but one thing's for sure, they're not getting this house. The next morning, Elliot was waiting for me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a wide smile. There was a folder of papers on the table. Dad, I sketched out a preliminary agreement. He pushed the folder toward me. Nothing binding, just for you to familiarize yourself with. I took the folder and put it aside without opening it. Thank you. I'll look at it later. Come on, look at it now, Elliot insisted. It's simple and straightforward. You give me the house and I'll make sure you stay in it for life. I opened the folder slowly and flipped through the document, pretending to read. In reality, my thoughts were far away. I was thinking about how much my son had changed. Once he was a kind, dreamy boy who wanted to be an architect and build beautiful buildings. When and why did money become more important to him than family? It looks interesting, I said, closing the folder. I need a consult. A consultation? Elliot frowned. From who? My friend Ray Griffith. He's a lawyer. Elliot tensed. Why? The document is very clear. Besides, it's going to cost money to consult a lawyer. Ray's an old friend of mine, I shrugged. He'll do it for me for free. But it's a lot of red tape. Elliot pounded his fist on the table, and I could see his true colors beneath the mask of a caring son. Just sign the damn papers. Elliot! Nancy appeared in the kitchen like magic. Watch your mouth. She came over to me and put her hand on my shoulder. Vernon, we understand your desire to check things out. That's fine. Call your friend. Get some advice. We're in no hurry. Her icy stare cast at Elliot said otherwise. Throughout the day, Elliot casually brought up the documents several times, trying to figure out when I was going to sign them. By late afternoon, his patience was wearing thin. "Dad, we have to go back to Boston in a couple days," he announced at dinner. "Nancy has work, I have meetings. It would be nice to get the house settled before we leave. We can come back later if we need to," Nancy quickly added. "But of course, it's easier to do it all at once." I chewed the meat slowly, pretending to consider their words. In fact, I'd already made up my mind. "You know, I've been thinking," I began cautiously. "Maybe you're right about the house. It's too big for me alone." Elliot's eyes lit up. "See? I told you so." He turned to Nancy. "I told you Dad would understand." "What do you suggest?" Nancy asked with ill-concealed greed. I sipped my wine, pausing dramatically. "Let's settle this the day after tomorrow. We'll have a family dinner here at my place. I'll cook something special, and we'll talk it over." "That's a great idea." Nancy clapped her hands together. "Isn't that right, darling?" Elliot nodded, though it was obvious he'd rather settle this right now. "Of course. A family dinner is wonderful." When they retired to their room, I quietly walked out to the backyard and called Ray Griffith. Lester was right. I needed protection from my own son, and I intended to get it. The day of the decisive dinner was overcast. Heavy gray clouds had covered the sky since morning, and by noon it was drizzling rain. I woke up early as usual, but instead of my usual morning routine, I got right down to preparing for the evening. I decided to make all of Elliot's favorite dishes from his childhood: Martha's roast, baked potatoes with rosemary, apple cinnamon pie. Let this dinner be symbolic. The last dinner in our family, no matter how bitter it turns out to be. Nancy woke up around 10 and came down to the kitchen in a silk robe that clearly cost more than all my shirts combined. "Geez, Vernon, are you cooking already?" She theatrically covered her mouth with her palm. "Let me help." "No need," I smiled as kindly as I could. "These are family recipes, and I'm used to making them myself." In truth, I wanted to avoid her company. Every day, her fake niceness irritated me more and more. "As you wish," Nancy shrugged and headed for the coffee maker. "Elliot will be thrilled. He said you were a great cook." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. Elliot had never shown much interest in my cooking, preferring restaurants to home-cooked meals. "Really? I didn't know he felt that way." Nancy faltered, realizing she'd said too much. "Well, maybe not in those words, but he always speaks warmly of your family." I nodded silently, concentrating on chopping vegetables. There was no point in accusing her of lying. Elliot didn't show up until lunchtime. He seemed agitated, even nervous, constantly checking his phone, drumming his fingers on the table, exchanging short phrases with Nancy that I couldn't make out. "Is everything all right, son?" I asked when Nancy went to the bathroom. "Ah, yeah, everything's fine," Elliot said with a strained smile. "It's just big day. I'm glad we're finally getting this thing resolved." "With the house?" "Exactly. I've already talked to a couple of potential buyers," he trailed off, realizing he'd said too much. "In theory, of course, just to see what the market value is. So that's it. They were already planning to sell the house without my consent. That finally convinced me that my plan was right." "I see," I nodded, pretending not to pay much attention to what he was saying. "Well, I hope dinner will be special." By 5 o'clock, the table was set. The roast was baking in the oven, spreading a delicious aroma through the house, and the pie was cooling on the windowsill. I went up to my room to change. I opened the top drawer of my dresser and pulled out the old tape recorder I'd used to record my thoughts after Martha's death. I checked to make sure it worked, put in new batteries, and put it in my shirt pocket. At 6 o'clock, we sat down at the table. Elliot brought a bottle of expensive wine, and Nancy insisted on using the best service. I didn't mind. Let tonight be special. "To family," Elliot toasted as we filled our glasses, "and to new beginnings." "To family," I echoed, discreetly pressing the button on the recorder in my pocket. Dinner was quiet for the first time. We talked about the weather, about Fall River news, about old acquaintances. Nancy complimented my cooking, and Elliot told some uninteresting stories about his work in Boston. But I could see him looking impatiently at the briefcase at his feet, which evidently contained the very documents. Finally, as we moved on to dessert, Elliot coughed and pulled a folder of papers out of the briefcase. "Dad, I've prepared all the documents we talked about." He placed the folder on the table between us. "It's very simple. You give me the title to the house and I guarantee you lifetime residence here. There are no pitfalls. I slowly opened the folder and pretended to read it carefully. In fact, I already knew what was written in those papers. Ray Griffith had explained to me the typical schemes of such taking of property from elderly relatives. The fine print usually spelled out the conditions under which the new owner could evict the old one, and Elliot almost certainly left himself that loophole. I don't see a clause that says I retain the right of occupancy, I said, flipping through the pages. It's implied, Elliot answered quickly. You're my father? I'm not kicking you out of the house. Then let's add this clause. I pulled a pen from my breast pocket. In black and white. Elliot and Nancy looked at each other. I don't think it's necessary, Nancy said with a strained smile. We're family, aren't we? Does a family need written guarantees? If guarantees are implied, why not spell them out? I smiled back, not relenting. Besides, the documents will have to be shown at the bank, at the tax office. It's better if it's done correctly. Dad, let's keep it simple. Elliot took the folder from me. I'll add that clause later, I promise. Right now, let's just sign the main contract. We're running out of time. Why? Sure. I leaned back in my chair. What's the rush? We have tickets for tomorrow, Nancy intervened, and Elliot has to file the paperwork at the registry office before we leave. I shook my head. No, I won't sign the papers without the residency clause, and I want my lawyer to check them out. Elliot pounded his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. What lawyer? It's a mere formality. His face began to redden. Don't you trust your own son? It's not about trust, I kept my cool. It's about order. I'm an old school man. I like things by the book. To hell with the rules! Elliot jumped up from his chair, his voice breaking into a shout. You will sign the deed to the house, now! I stared at him in silence, his face contorted with anger, and thought bitterly about how far apart we were. Was he always like this, and I just didn't want to see it? Or had life really changed him that much? Nancy suddenly laughed, a high, unpleasant laugh. Old man, agree to this now, or you'll live out your life on the streets. She waved her hands picturesquely. What have you got to lose? Elliot will get the house when you die anyway, so why not give him a gift now? I looked at her carefully, seeing her for the first time for what she really was, greedy, calculating, unscrupulous. She wasn't even trying to hide the contempt in her voice anymore. He's right, Nancy went on, addressing Elliot now. Why do we even bother with him? If he doesn't want to be nice, there are other ways. Shut up, Elliot hissed, but it was too late. What other ways? I asked, pretending to be stunned. What do you mean? Nothing. Elliot tried to pull himself together. Nancy's just upset. We're all upset. Dad, please, let's settle this right here and now. I'll add your residency clause, I promise. I looked at them for a long time, pretending to hesitate. Then I nodded slowly. Okay, add the clause and I'll sign it. Elliot's eyes lit up. He quickly took out a pen and began to write in the margins of the document. Vernon Holm retains the right to reside in this house for life? Okay with that? I nodded, still indecisive. Yes, but I need some time. Can I go up to my room for a few minutes? I want to get my thoughts together before I make this big decision. Of course, Dad. Elliot relaxed, thinking he had the upper hand. We'll wait. I got up from the table and walked slowly toward the stairs. When I was halfway up the stairs, I heard Nancy say quietly, Did you see his face? Like a child who's lost a toy. But now we'll have a house, Elliot replied. We'll sign it and put it on the market tomorrow. What about his lifetime residency? Nancy's voice was mocking. That note in the margin is null and void, Elliot said. Once the house is in my name, I can do whatever I want with it. Let the old man go to a nursing home, or his buddy Lester. They laughed, and I felt something inside me finally die. My last hope that there was any humanity left in my son. In my room, I took the tape recorder out of my pocket and checked the recording. The voices were clear, just what I needed. I sat on the bed and called Ray Griffith. Ray, it's Vernon. They're here with the documents. Everything's going according to plan. Good, Ray answered. Lester and I will be there in 15 minutes. Did you write down their threats? Yeah, it's all there. They were screaming so loud the neighbors could probably hear them. That's good. Hang in there, buddy. We'll be there soon. I ended the call and got Lester on the phone. Les, they've opened up. They said they're going to put the house on the market as soon as I sign the papers. I told you so, Lester exclaimed. The bastards. We're on our way with Ray. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't sign anything. Don't worry, I won't, I grinned. But let them think they've won. I tucked the recorder back into my pocket and lingered for a moment at Martha's picture. What would she do in my place? Would she forgive me? Maybe. Martha had always been kinder than me, but she's also always stood for justice. He doesn't deserve your kindness, I whispered, looking at her smiling face. Our son is long past the boy we raised. I took a deep breath and walked back down to the dining room. Elliot and Nancy had already opened a second bottle of wine and were loudly discussing where they would go on vacation when they got the money for the house. There he was, Nancy exclaimed when she saw me. Our dear Vernon, come join us. We were just celebrating. Celebrating? I acted surprised. Celebrating what? Your wise decision, of course. Elliot slid the papers and pen toward me. Here, I've prepared everything. All you have to do is sign it. I sat down slowly at the table and took the pen. No, 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 Elliot interrupted. No thinking. Just sign here and here. He jabbed his finger at the places to sign. Elliot's right, darling, Nancy said, filling my glass with wine. No more thinking. It's time to act. I raised my glass, pretending I was going to drink to their success, and at that moment the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Elliot frowned. I have no idea, I shrugged, hiding a smile. I'll go look. I took my time heading toward the door, feeling the tension building behind me. When I opened the door, I was relieved to see Ray Griffith and Lester on the doorstep. Both of them looked serious and determined. Dad, who's there? Elliot shouted from the dining room. Old friends, I answered, letting the guests into the house. They were just in time for our family council. 3 hours later, the kitchen in my house resembled a battlefield. The remnants of the dinner had gone cold and forgotten. The wine bottles were empty, and the air was tingling with tension. At the table where Elliot and Nancy had recently celebrated their near victory, there were now 6 people seated. Not only Ray and Lester had joined us, but also Jennifer Moore, the notary whom Ray had brought with him, and Mrs. Becker, a representative of the New Life Charitable Foundation. Elliot and Nancy's faces underwent a remarkable metamorphosis during those hours. Their smiles of confidence were gone. Now they looked as confused and frightened as children caught stealing cookies. Let's summarize the results. Ray Griffith tapped his pen on the table, attracting everyone's attention. Mr. Elliot Holm and Mrs. Nancy Holm, I understand you came to Fall River to persuade Mr. Vernon Holm to transfer ownership of this house to you? Elliot squirmed in his chair, avoiding my eyes. I don't see what all this circus is about, he muttered. We were just discussing family matters. Let me remind you that all of your discussion is recorded. Ray pointed to the tape recorder lying in the center of the table. The small device seemed to catch the eyes of everyone present, including threats to evict Mr. Holm and sell the house without his consent. It was set in the heart, Nancy exclaimed, her painted lips trembling. We would never... That notation in the margin is null and void. Once the house is deeded to me, I can do what I want with it. And let the old man go to a nursing home, quoted Lester, looking at Elliot with undisguised contempt. Are those your words, boy? Elliot turned pale. It's unethical to eavesdrop, he muttered, but his words sounded pathetic, even to himself. I watched the scene in silence, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and relief. On the one hand, it was painful to see how low my only son had fallen. On the other hand, I had finally stopped fooling myself. There is no point in clinging to illusions when the reality is so obvious. Ethics is an interesting topic of discussion, I said at last. Maybe we should talk about the ethics of trying to take the house away from your father, too. Nancy laughed nervously. My God, what a big word. Taking the house away. We were just suggesting better management of the property. For your own good, Vernon. That's enough, Ray raised his hand. I think it's time we explain the situation. Mr. Holm? I nodded and pulled some documents out of the envelope Ray had brought. Elliot, Nancy, I began, trying to speak calmly. I want you to know that I wasn't the naive old man you thought I was. As soon as you started talking about remortgaging the house, I knew where this was going. Dad, we never thought you were... Shut up, I held up my hand. It's my turn to talk. A month ago, before you arrived, I'd already gotten a warning from Lester that you were interested in my house. Calling the neighbors, asking about my health, about the condition of the property. Elliot glared fiercely at Lester, but he only snorted. And then I took action, I continued, unfolding the papers. Saturi, with Ray's help, I had this house deeded to me. It now belongs to the New Life Charitable Foundation. What? Nancy jumped up from her chair. That's impossible. You couldn't... All the paperwork is in order. Mrs. Becker, the foundation spokeswoman, intervened. She was a stern, middle-aged woman in a business suit. The deed of gift is notarized. The foundation assumes the maintenance of the house and grounds, and Mr. Holm retains the right of lifetime residence. Elliot looked like he'd been hit on the head. He was gulping for air, unable to find the words. But why? He finally squeezed out. Why give the house to strangers instead of his own son? Because these strangers care about creating affordable housing for low-income families, I answered firmly. After I die, there will be a support center here for people in difficult life situations. The house that my grandfathers and great-grandfathers built will continue to serve people, not become a bargaining chip to pay off your gambling debts. But it's our inheritance, Nancy shrieked. You had no right. So, I don't remember any mention of Nancy and Martha's will or my parents. I shook my head. And as for Elliot, son, you gave up your inheritance when you decided to take it from me in my lifetime. Elliot jumped up, knocking over his chair. That's illegal. You're out of your mind. We'll challenge it in court. You can try, Ray replied calmly, but I wouldn't advise it. First of all, we have a recording of your threats. Secondly, Mr. Holm underwent an independent medical examination before making the gift. We have a doctor's report on his full legal capacity. And thirdly, added Jennifer Moore, notary, the deed of gift is legally flawless. Challenging it would be problematic. Nancy collapsed back in her chair and sobbed loudly, ugly, smearing mascara on her cheeks. You don't understand. We have no money. We don't have any money. We were counting on this house. Elliot owes money to some very dangerous people, and they've already threatened. Shut up, Elliot shouted, and for the first time I saw him looking at his wife with unconcealed hatred. Your financial problems are not my concern, I said firmly. I've spent my life doing honest work. I've never taken bribes, never been involved in fraud, never gotten into debt I couldn't pay back. I learned to live within my means. I taught you the same thing, Elliot, but you chose a different path. There was a heavy silence. Lester coughed awkwardly. Mrs. Becker was poring over papers, avoiding looking at the family drama. Ray kept his professional calm, though I could see the corners of his lips twitching. You always like to humiliate me, Elliot finally hissed, always thinking I wasn't good enough. No matter what I did, it wasn't good enough for you. That's not true, I shook my head. I was always proud of you. When you went to college, when you started your career, I believed in you, and I believe now that you can do better, but not at my expense. What a noble thing to do, Nancy laughed hysterically. That's amazing. A charitable foundation, helping the needy. Don't you want to think about your own son? I am thinking about him, I answered calmly. That's why I won't let him solve his problems that way. It won't make him a better man. Elliot clenched his fist so white his knuckles turned white. You're going to regret this, old man, he said through gritted teeth. Is that a threat? Ray intervened, raising an eyebrow. Because if it is, I'd advise you to choose your words more carefully. Threats in front of witnesses aren't the smartest strategy. Elliot took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. I just don't understand, he said more quietly. I'm your son, your blood. How can you do this to me? Precisely because you're my son, I replied, feeling my heart clench. I don't want you to go through life using other people, even if that person is me. Nancy suddenly jumped up and rushed toward the exit. I'm not listening to this anymore. Elliot, we're leaving. Now. Elliot didn't move from his seat, looking at the papers in front of him. There must be a way to fix this, he muttered. There has to be. There's only one way, I said softly. Start over. Get an honest job. Pay off your debts. live within your means. Easy for you to say, Elliot grinned bitterly. You've never been in my shoes. I haven't, I agreed. And I wouldn't want to. But I know you're stronger than you think. You can handle it. Nancy came back into the room with their suitcases. Elliot, I said we're leaving. He slowly got up and picked up his suitcase without looking at his wife. What now? He asked, turning to me. Now you're leaving this house. I stood up too. And you're not coming back here. At least not until you learn to respect other people's property and decisions. You're kicking us out? Nancy went back to squealing. At night? Where are we going to sleep? At the motel on the highway, Lester answered. The rooms there aren't bad, and the prices are reasonable. Or you could go back to Boston. But we don't have tickets until tomorrow, Nancy moaned. Not my problem, I shrugged. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call the police. You wouldn't dare. Nancy took a step toward me, but Ray stepped between us. Not only would he dare, but he has to do it, the lawyer said calmly. You threatened the owner of the house, planned to defraud him, and now you refuse to leave private property at the owner's request. That's several articles of the criminal code, Mrs. Holm. Nancy backed away, mumbling something unintelligible. Elliot walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. Is this really what you want? Throw your own son out on the street. I held his gaze. I didn't throw you out, Elliot. You chose that path yourself when you decided to deceive me. I'm just protecting what's mine and the memory of your mother, who loved this house so much. Something trembled in his face at the mention of Martha. For a moment I thought I saw remorse in his eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by cold fury. All right, he said flatly. We're leaving. But this isn't over, Father. You'll regret it. Another threat? Ray asked, turning on the recorder on his phone. Would you like to add to the collection? Elliot cursed and headed for the exit. Nancy, sobbing, followed him. We all walked them to the door in silence. At the threshold, Elliot stopped and turned around. I won't bother you anymore. Forget that you have a son. Shakadur. It's your choice, I replied quietly. But if you ever want to come back, just to talk, father to son, with no second thoughts, my door's open. Elliot didn't answer anything. He picked up his suitcase and walked out into the night. Nancy, casting one last hateful glance at me, followed him. Their footsteps rustled on the gravel of the driveway, car doors slammed, and the engine rumbled. A moment later, the sound of the car pulling away melted into the silence of the night. I closed the door and turned to the rest of the guests. Well, I guess this is the end of our meeting. Are you all right, Vernon? Ray put his hand on my shoulder. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. In time. Mrs. Becker and Jennifer Moore tactfully said goodbye, leaving the three of us, me, Ray, and Lester. We sat on the veranda, sipping whiskey from old glasses my father had bought in the 40s. He'll be back, Lester said after a long silence. Maybe not right away, but he'll be back. I'm not sure, I shook my head. Elliot had always been proud and resentful, and today his pride had taken a severe blow. Pride is a luxury that only people with something to be proud of can afford, Ray pointed out. If I were him, I'd be ashamed, not proud. We were silent again. The night wind rustled through the trees and the train horn sounded in the distance. Life went on. Thank you, I said at last. Both of you. I couldn't have done it without you. It's nothing, Lester said. What you've done for the foundation is really impressive. You gave your house to people who need it. That's real generosity. Sure, and real revenge. I couldn't help but smile. Elliot won't get a dime. That's not revenge, Ray countered. It's justice. There's a difference. I nodded, looking up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, among the stars, Martha was watching us. I wondered if she would approve of my decision, or would she find a way to forgive her son, to give him another chance. But I'm not Martha. I'm just an old man who's turned a blind eye to the truth for too long. And today that truth finally came out. Elliot and Nancy found themselves on the street, literally and figuratively. They've lost not only the roof over their heads for the night, but also any hope of easy money. What was next for them? I didn't know. But whatever happened, it was their road now, their choice. And I had my home, my friends, and my conscience. And that was enough. Autumn and Fall River had always been my favorite time of year. The maples along the street turned fiery red. The air became clearer, and the river that gave our town its name became darker and deeper. On such days, I especially liked to sit on the veranda with a cup of hot coffee, watching the wind play with the fallen leaves. It had been exactly 6 months since the night Elliot and Nancy left my house. 6 months of silence, no calls, no letters, no surprise visits. It was as if I'd never had a son. Sometimes I caught myself missing him, not the calculating man he'd become, but the little boy Martha and I had loved so much, the child who had once looked at me with admiration, like a hero. That morning I was having breakfast on the veranda when the phone rang. I took my time answering it. Most of the calls now were from Ray Griffith with updates on the charity's affairs, or from Paula Drake, my neighbor, with whom we'd been spending more and more time in recent months. "Vernon Holmes speaking," I said, finally picking up the phone. "Mr. Holmes, this is Janet Wilkins from the Boston Credit Union." The voice on the other end was businesslike and dry. "I'm calling about your son, Elliot Holmes. He listed you as his contact." I tensed. "Is something wrong?" "Mr. Holmes hasn't returned our calls or emails for the past 2 months. He has a significant outstanding loan balance. We have been forced to start eviction proceedings from the apartment he rents." I slowly sank back into my chair. So Elliot had defaulted on his debts after all. "Ms. Wilkins, I'm afraid I can't help you. My son and we don't have a relationship." "See, I understand," she sounded tired. "I just thought you should know. We have information that Mr. Holmes and his wife have moved, but we don't know the new address." After that call, I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind kept going back to Elliot. Where is he now? What happened to him? Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still my son. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The October air was cool and invigorating. I headed toward the Central Park where I taught chess lessons for children on Tuesdays and Thursdays. This new hobby had appeared to me only 3 months ago, but it had already become an important part of my life. It all started by accident. I was sitting in the park playing chess with myself, a habit I had picked up when Martha was alive and kept me company. A boy of about 9 came up to me, watching the pieces with curiosity. "Are you playing with yourself?" he asked with genuine surprise. "Is it possible to play like that?" "You can if you know the rules," I answered and offered him a game. From that day on, Timmy became my first student. Soon other children joined us, and the director of the local club invited me to teach regular lessons. Now twice a week I taught the children the basics of chess strategy, and in return they gave me their spontaneity and energy. The park was empty. There were still 2 hours to go before class. I sat down on a bench, watching a janitor in an orange jacket rake up the fallen leaves. "Vernon!" a woman's voice called out to me. I thought I'd find you here." Paula Drake, my neighbor, was approaching down the alley. She was 65, but she moved with the energy of a 40-year-old. Having been widowed 5 years ago, Paula had not withdrawn from her grief, but had become active in the community. She led a knitting group at the library, organized charity luncheons, and looked younger than her years. "Paula," I smiled as I walked up to meet her. "Tunt, what brings you to the park so early?" "Looking for lunch," she smiled slyly. "The new cafe on Maple Street serves delicious turkey sandwiches." Paula and I had grown close over the past few months. It started with neighborly help. I fixed the wiring in her house. She brought fresh baked goods. Then there were walks together, trips to the movies, dinners out. Some neighbors began to look at us with understanding smiles, but we both were in no hurry to give a name to our relationship. The memories of our departed spouses were too fresh. "I'd love to keep you company," I agreed. "But first I need to stop by the club to see if everything's ready for tonight's class." "I'll come with you." Paula took my arm. "I love watching you work with the kids. You have talent." At the clubhouse, we were met by Sharon, the receptionist, an energetic middle-aged woman with bright red hair. "Vernon," she exclaimed, "it's so good of you to come. I have a surprise for you." She handed me an envelope with the city government emblem on it. "What's this?" I twirled the envelope in my hands. "Open it," Sharon nudged me. Inside was an official letter signed by the mayor of the city. I was invited to give a chess master class at the city festival next month. "In recognition of your contribution to the intellectual recreation of the youth of Fall River," the letter said. "This is unexpected. I mumbled, feeling a lump in my throat. Well deserved, Paula exclaimed, squeezing my hand. Sonarinami, you do so much for these kids, I smiled embarrassedly. After retirement, I often felt useless, especially after Martha's death. It seemed like my life was over, and nothing meaningful would ever happen again. But now at 69, I suddenly found that I could be needed, that I could be useful and bring joy to people. After lunch with Paula, I went home to get ready for my evening class and found a familiar figure on the porch. Elliot was sitting on the steps, slouching and looking down at the ground. He looked gaunt, thin. The expensive suit I'd last seen him in had been replaced by shabby jeans and an old jacket. Elliot? I stopped a few feet away from him. He looked up, and I saw a mixture of shame and despair in his eyes. Hi, Dad. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in a while. Imrenoam, I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. What's wrong? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Elliot grinned bitterly. Everything happened. We got evicted from the apartment. Nancy left me. I lost my job. The debt collectors are calling day and night. I stared at him in silence, waiting for him to continue. Yeah, I have nowhere to go, he stammered. I realize I don't have the right to ask, but maybe I could stay for a couple days until I find a job and a place to live. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have hesitated to open the door for him. But something's different now. Maybe I've finally learned to see people for what they are, not what I want them to be. Are you alone? I asked instead of answering. Yeah. Nancy left me for some businessman she met in a bar. Said she wanted a man who could provide for her, not a loser with debt. I nodded. Nancy was exactly as I'd thought she'd be, looking for profit, not love. Let's go inside, I said. Let's talk. In the kitchen, Elliot greedily devoured the sandwich I'd offered him. Apparently, he hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. How much do you owe? I asked bluntly. About 170,000. He didn't look up. And that's just the official debts. There are other people I've borrowed from, unofficially. I whistled. How do you plan to pay it off? I don't know. Elliot spread his hands. Thought maybe you'd, give you money? I shook my head. Elliot, I don't have that kind of money. And even if I did, it wouldn't solve your problem. Well then, maybe, he hesitated. Maybe there's a way to get the house back. Cancel the deed of gift? If we sold it, the money would be enough to... No, I said firmly. Kelmin, the house belongs to the foundation, and it stays with the foundation. Elliot clenched his teeth, and for a moment I saw the same rage in his eyes that I'd seen 6 months ago. But then it was replaced by fatigue. I thought so, he muttered. Well, I'm sorry to bother you. I'll be going. Where to? I asked. I don't know. I'll find a motel somewhere. With what money? Elliot didn't say anything. I sighed. Despite everything, he was still my son. The only thing that connected me to Martha, to our past. You can stay one night, I said, and tomorrow we'll think together about what to do next. The relief on his face was so obvious that I felt uneasy. Had he really hit rock bottom? Thanks, Dad. He held out his hand, but I didn't shake it. One condition, I said firmly. No talk about money or the house or helping me pay off my debts. You're a grown man, and you're going to take care of your own problems. Elliot nodded silently. That evening after chess class, I called Ray Griffith and told him about my son's visit. Be careful, Vern, Ray warned me. He might try to trick you again. I know, I sighed. But I can't just throw him out on the street. You're too kind, I could hear the doubt in Ray's voice. But it's your decision. After my conversation with Ray, I sat on the veranda for a long time, listening to the silence of the night. Not a sound came from the guest room where Elliot was staying. Strangely, I felt neither joy at being reunited with my son, nor anger at his attempt to use me again. Only fatigue and a kind of muffled longing. The next day at breakfast, Elliot was unusually silent. I have a suggestion, I said when we finished eating. My friend Don Higgins, who owns a construction company, is looking for an assistant. It's a tough job, but it pays good money. I could put in a good word for you. Construction work? Elliot grimaced. Dad, I've never worked with my hands. It's about time you started, I shrugged. Mushroom. Or do you have other options? He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Okay, I'll give it a try. Also, I continued, my neighbor Lester rents out a room in the basement. It's cheap. You can stay there until you get back on your feet. Lester's, Elliot frowned. But he hates me. He's strict but fair, I argued, and he agreed to give you a chance. It wasn't easy to talk Lester into it, really. The old friend grumbled and called me a soft-hearted idealist, but in the end he agreed, on the condition that Elliot would pay the rent on time and help with the repair of the veranda. Can I live here? Elliot looked around the kitchen. The house is big. There's plenty of room. No, I shook my head. I didn't have to explain that it wasn't just about his past betrayal. It was about me. About my new life that I'd been building these past 6 months. It was about Paula, with whom we were growing closer. The children I was teaching chess to, in the plans for the future that didn't include being an ATM machine for a grade-age son. Elliot wanted to object, but held back. Maybe he was finally starting to realize he couldn't manipulate me anymore. When do I need to talk to your friend Don? He asked instead. Marie, tonight at 2, I'll take you. Later, walking with Elliot through the streets of Fall River toward Don Higgins's office, I felt a strange calm. I had done everything I could for my son, offered a job, a place to live, a chance to start over. But now his future was up to him. You know, Dad, Elliot said suddenly, I envy you. Me? I looked at him in surprise. What's there to envy? You have principles, he said the word with some surprise. You know what's right and what's wrong. You stick to it. I stayed silent, not knowing what to say. I've spent my whole life chasing money, chasing status, Elliot continued, and in the end, I was left with nothing. No money, no family, no self-respect. It's never too late to change, I said quietly. You think so? He grinned bitterly. I'm sure. We stopped in front of Don Higgins's office. Elliot nervously adjusted the collar of the shirt I'd lent him. Good luck, I said, extending my hand. This time I shook his palm. Not because I forgave him or believed him sincere, but because I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, a glimmer of real remorse. I didn't know if Elliot could turn his life around. I didn't know if he would learn honesty and responsibility, but I gave him a chance. And the rest was up to him. And as he hid behind the office door, I thought that maybe true fatherly love isn't about giving kids everything they want, but giving them what they really need, even if it's hard lessons and harsh limitations.